Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. The tension at Forrester Creations continues to spiral out of control as Steffy Forrester and Hope Logan once again find themselves locked in an increasingly personal and explosive rivalry. What started as professional disagreement has now evolved into something far more cutting, with Steffy openly demeaning Hope at every turn. Hope, who once approached the situation with frustration and confrontation alone, is now pushing into more strategic territory, using subtle manipulation and quiet subterfuge in an attempt to undermine Steffy's authority. The workplace tension is no longer contained behind office doors. It's spilling into every relationship, every conversation, and every corner of their lives. And with neither woman willing to back down, the atmosphere at Forrester Creations feels heavier than ever, as if a single misstep could ignite everything into chaos. This week, the conflict intensifies when Hope turns to her mother, Brooke Logan, during an emotional conversation at the Logan estate. In that moment, Hope pours out everything she has been holding in, insisting that she has devoted her entire heart and soul to Forrester Creations, only to feel deliberately targeted by Steffy. She is convinced that Steffy is intentionally trying to destroy her line, hope for the future, piece by piece. Brooke, however, tries to steady the situation, urging her daughter to see it as a business decision rather than a personal attack. She reminds Hope that the company's current focus is on Eric Forrester's new fashion line and that these shifts are part of larger corporate strategy. But Hope refuses to accept that explanation, insisting that Steffy's behavior has gone far beyond professional boundaries. Hope then reveals a moment that fuels her anger even further, claiming that Steffy laughed directly in her face. That single detail shifts the emotional weight of the conversation, and even Ridge Forrester is drawn into the fallout when he hears about it. Ridge confronts Steffy about her behavior, expecting at least some acknowledgement or restraint, but Steffy remains completely unfazed. She shows no remorse, no apology, and no hesitation in defending her actions, not toward Hope, and not even toward Ridge himself. Her stance is clear. She believes the decision was justified, and she sees no reason to soften her approach. That emotional detachment only deepens the divide, leaving everyone around her unsettled by how far she is willing to go. As the pressure builds, Hope begins to feel increasingly cornered, expressing that she is being punished rather than managed. Brooke, still attempting to avoid escalation, insists that her only goal is to maintain peace within the family and the company. But Hope interprets her mother's restraint as weakness. In a moment of frustration, she accuses Brooke of being passive and unwilling to stand up for herself. That accusation cuts deeper than expected, and Hope pushes even further, insisting that Brooke should not be stepping aside at all. Instead, she argues that her mother should be positioned as co-CEO alongside Ridge, claiming Brooke has contributed far more to Forrester Creations than Steffy ever has. Hope's argument grows more intense as she frames Steffy as unqualified privilege, someone benefiting from family status rather than merit. Ironically, the accusation of nepotism carries its own contradiction, given that Hope herself was originally given her start in fashion through family connections, when Katie Logan helped launch her clothing line. Still, in her emotional state, Hope is focused entirely on dismantling Steffy's authority. She insists that Brooke should be the one leading, issuing decisions rather than receiving them from what she calls Ridge's Nepo daughter. This emotional push begins to take effect, and Brooke slowly finds herself being pulled into Hope's conviction, even as she tries to remain cautious. Hope continues to escalate the pressure, deliberately encouraging Brooke to step into power rather than stay in the background. She tells her mother that she has never stopped fighting for her dreams, and that Brooke should not have done so either. The emotional manipulation is subtle but effective, And soon, Brooke begins to consider the idea of confronting Ridge directly about leadership. Hope's strategy becomes clearer. If Brooke can gain a position of authority, hope for the future might be restored. In her mind, Steffi's continued leadership means permanent uncertainty for her brand, while Brooke in power represents security and survival. Meanwhile, Ridge finds himself stuck in an increasingly uncomfortable position. While he agrees with Steffi's decision to shelve Hope's line, he is uneasy about the way the decision is being communicated. Steffi's lack of empathy toward Hope's emotional reaction does not sit well with him, even if he supports the outcome. At the same time, Steffi appears completely unmoved, believing that Hope has no leverage left and no meaningful alternatives within the company. Her confidence is unwavering, and her dismissal of Hope is what ultimately leads to the infamous moment where she laughs in her face, an act that now threatens to spiral into something far larger than either woman intended. Ridge, however, has a long history of avoiding firm positions when emotional conflict arises, especially when it involves the women in his life. His past with both Taylor Hayes and Brooke Logan is defined by hesitation and inconsistency, as he often shifts between sides without fully committing to either. Time and again, he has struggled to set boundaries, leaving tension to build until it becomes unmanageable. That same pattern threatens to repeat itself now, as Ridge risks being pulled apart by Steffi's authority on one side and Brooke's emotional pressure on the other. If he supports Steffi, Brooke will feel betrayed. If he supports Brooke, Steffi will erupt. And once again, Ridge seems trapped in a situation where every decision leads to fallout. The corporate stakes behind the conflict are equally volatile. The decision to shelve Hope for the future is supported not only by Steffi, but also by Carter Walton and Ridge, who both see it as a necessary business move. However, their support does not extend to Steffi's harsh delivery or lack of sensitivity. At the same time, Brooke's only real path to regaining influence lies in convincing Eric to shift his stance. With his significant ownership stake in Forrester Creations, his support could tip the balance in her favor. But that path is uncertain, especially given past history. Eric has not forgotten Brooke's role in previous internal power struggles, particularly when she supported Ridge in pushing him out of the company. Because of that history, Eric may not be willing to back Brooke again so easily, even if he has moved past old grievances. And if Brooke does approach Ridge with a plan to replace Steffi, the reaction could be explosive. Ridge may interpret it as yet another attempt to destabilize the company's leadership structure. He could very well see Hope's influence over Brooke as a repeat of past corporate power plays, what he might describe as a coup 2.0. That framing only raises the stakes further, turning what began as a family disagreement into a full-scale corporate war. As tensions reach their peak, it becomes increasingly clear that Hope's strategy is a high-risk gamble. She is trying to force a reversal of decisions that both Steffi and others believe are justified, and in doing so, she is pushing every emotional and professional boundary available to her. But there is a growing sense that her plan may not succeed as intended. Instead of destabilizing Steffi's position, her actions may ultimately accelerate her own exit from the company. By the time May Sweeps concludes around May 20th, it appears increasingly likely that Hope may leave Forrester Creations altogether. If that happens, the fallout will be widespread and deeply personal. Brooke will be left furious, not only at Steffi for pushing Hope out, but potentially also at Ridge for failing to intervene. Donna Logan will find herself emotionally torn, while Eric will be forced to confront the consequences of yet another internal fracture within the company he built. What is unfolding is not just a business dispute, but a full-scale emotional collapse that threatens to reshape relationships, alliances, and power structures within Forrester Creations. And as history has shown, when the Logans and Forresters collide at this level, the damage rarely stays contained. As the storm builds inside Forrester Creations, the emotional fallout begins spreading far beyond boardrooms and design studios, seeping into every relationship connected to the company. The possibility of Hope Logan leaving does not feel like a rumor anymore. It starts to feel like an approaching reality that no one can fully stop. Within the walls of the Logan and Forrester families, conversations become sharper, more defensive, and far more fragile. Brooke Logan is no longer just trying to mediate. She is now deeply emotionally invested in protecting her daughter's future, and that shift changes everything. At the same time, Steffy Forrester remains firmly unmoved, holding her ground with the same unshakable conviction that started the entire conflict. The contrast between emotional urgency and cold corporate certainty begins to define every interaction moving forward. Brooke's frustration grows as she starts to realize that diplomacy may no longer be enough to resolve what is happening. Hope's words continue echoing in her mind, especially the idea that she should step into a leadership role and challenge Steffy directly. That thought begins to take root, not as an impulse, but as a serious consideration. When Brooke finally decides to approach Ridge Forrester again, it is no longer just a casual discussion. It becomes a charged confrontation layered with history, emotion, and unresolved tension. Ridge, already under pressure from both sides, senses immediately that this conversation will not end easily. He is being pulled into a situation where every response feels like it could ignite another fire elsewhere. Ridge listens as Brooke pushes the idea that Steffy's leadership is becoming too rigid, too dismissive, and too damaging to the company's emotional stability. But Ridge's reaction is measured, even reluctant, as he tries to separate emotion from business logic. He acknowledges the strain but remains unconvinced that removing Steffy is the answer. In his mind, leadership changes based on emotional conflict only open the door to instability. At the same time, he cannot ignore the growing perception that Steffy's communication style is escalating tensions unnecessarily. That contradiction leaves Ridge in a constant state of hesitation, as if every path forward leads to consequences he cannot fully control. Meanwhile, Steffy continues to operate from a position of absolute certainty, believing the decision regarding Hope for the future was not only justified, but necessary for the company's direction. She sees Hope's reaction as emotional resistance rather than valid concern, and that belief only strengthens her resolve. To Steffy, the idea of reversing course feels like a step backward, one that could compromise the company's focus on innovation and legacy branding under Eric Forrester's renewed influence. Her confidence, however, begins to appear increasingly isolating, as fewer people around her fully endorse both her decision and her delivery. Even allies like Carter Walton remain supportive of the business choice, but uneasy about the emotional collateral damage. As the tension spreads, Eric finds himself drawn closer to the center of the conflict than he expected. His position within Forrester Creations gives him influence, but also responsibility, and now both sides begin looking toward him as a potential deciding factor. Brooke's hope lies in convincing Eric to reconsider the balance of leadership, while Steffy trusts that his respect for structure and loyalty will keep him aligned with her. Yet Eric is not blind to the history behind these disputes. He remembers past fractures within the company, especially moments when internal power struggles nearly destabilized everything he built. That memory weighs heavily on his decision-making, making him far more cautious than either side anticipates. At the same time, Ridge begins to feel the pressure of being positioned as a potential bridge between opposing forces. Every conversation he has now carries hidden expectations. Brooke hoping for support, Steffy expecting loyalty, and Eric watching carefully for stability. The emotional strain of being the central figure in so many competing demands begins to wear on him. He recognizes that any move he makes will be interpreted as a declaration of allegiance, even if his intention is simply to maintain balance. That realization leaves him increasingly cautious, almost paralyzed, as he tries to avoid triggering further escalation. Within this rising chaos, Hope continues to wrestle with the consequences of her strategy. What once felt like a necessary fight for her brand is now beginning to resemble something more uncertain and uncontrollable. She pushed Brooke toward power, believing it would secure her future, but the ripple effects are expanding beyond her expectations. Instead of a clean resolution, she is watching the entire Forrester structure destabilize around her. The emotional cost of her actions becomes more visible with each passing moment, especially as relationships strain under pressure that can no longer be hidden behind professional language. Brooke, now fully emotionally engaged, begins to shift from persuasion to determination. She no longer sees this as just a workplace disagreement, but as a defining moment for her daughter's future. That shift makes her more willing to challenge Ridge directly, even if it risks damaging their relationship. The idea of confronting Eric also becomes more real, not as a theoretical possibility, but as an action she may soon have to take. Her internal conflict deepens, torn between preserving peace and fighting for what she believes is right for Hope. That emotional conflict mirrors the larger instability spreading through the company itself. As tensions converge, it becomes increasingly clear that Forrester Creations is heading toward a breaking point. The lines between personal loyalty and corporate authority are blurring beyond repair. Steffi stands firm in her vision, Brooke prepares to escalate her fight for influence, and Ridge remains caught between them, unable to fully satisfy either side without triggering consequences. Eric watches as the family he helped build threatens to fracture once again under competing visions of control and legacy. And at the center of it all, Hope's desperate attempt to protect her future may have set in motion a chain reaction that no one can fully stop. What began as a dispute over a fashion line is now transforming into something far larger, a battle of identity, authority, and legacy within one of the most powerful fashion dynasties in the industry. And as the pressure builds toward an inevitable breaking point, it becomes clear that the next decision made inside Forrester Creations will not just affect business. It will reshape relationships, redefine alliances, and determine who ultimately holds power when the dust finally settles. As the pressure inside Forrester Creations continues to mount, the sense of inevitability becomes impossible to ignore. What once felt like a manageable disagreement now carries the weight of a corporate collapse in slow motion. Hope Logan finds herself standing at a crossroads where every direction comes with loss. Staying means continuing under the shadow of Steffi Forrester's authority, a reality she no longer believes she can endure. Leaving, however, means walking away from everything she has built, everything she fought for, and everything she hoped would define her legacy. That internal conflict grows heavier with each passing hour as the walls around her world begin to close in emotionally and professionally. Meanwhile, Brooke Logan takes a decisive step forward, no longer willing to remain in a passive role. Her conversation with Ridge Forrester becomes sharper, more urgent, and far more personal than before. Brooke no longer frames the issue as a disagreement between executives. She frames it as a direct threat to her daughter's future. Ridge listens, visibly strained, caught between his understanding of business logic and the emotional force standing in front of him. He tries once again to maintain neutrality, but neutrality itself is starting to feel like a decision with consequences. Brooke presses harder, insisting that if the structure of leadership does not change, Hope will be pushed out completely. Ridge, however, is unwilling to ignore what he sees as the practical reality of the situation. He believes Steffi's decision to shelve Hope's line, while harsh, was rooted in strategy rather than personal vendetta. That belief puts him directly at odds with Brooke's growing conviction. The conversation begins to echo the same pattern that has defined their relationship for years. Brooke pushing for emotional justice, Ridge retreating into corporate reasoning, and neither fully able to bridge the gap between them. His inability to take a firm side once again becomes the center of frustration. Brooke senses it, and for the first time, she openly challenges not just Steffi, but Ridge's reluctance itself. At the same time, Steffi remains completely focused on maintaining control over the company's direction. She views the growing backlash not as a threat, but as resistance to necessary change. In her mind, the decision regarding Hope for the future is already settled, and any attempt to reverse it would signal weakness. That conviction hardens further as she becomes aware that Brooke is actively pushing Ridge toward reconsideration. Steffi interprets this not as negotiation, but as interference, an attempt to undermine leadership decisions through emotional pressure. Her response is immediate and unwavering. She refuses to entertain the idea of reversing course. As tensions escalate behind the scenes, Hope reaches her breaking point. The emotional weight of feeling dismissed, cornered, and strategically sidelined begins to outweigh her desire to fight within the system. Every attempt to regain stability for her brand has instead deepened the conflict around her. She begins to see clearly that her presence at Forrester Creations has become the center of a war she did not fully intend to escalate. The realization is painful but unavoidable. What she once saw as a battle for respect now feels like a larger struggle over control and identity within the company itself. Brooke, sensing her daughter's emotional decline, becomes even more determined to act. She pushes Ridge one final time, urging him to consider the long-term consequences of allowing Steffi's decision to stand unchallenged. But Ridge is trapped in a position where any move he makes will fracture something important. If he supports Brooke, he risks undermining Steffi's authority. If he supports Steffi, he risks permanently damaging his relationship with Brooke and Hope. And if he refuses to choose at all, he risks allowing the situation to collapse on its own. That pressure begins to show in his demeanor, as his usual calm starts to erode under competing demands.